by doing the bloomers. This is the last step, and before I take it to the machine to sew, I want to talk to you about telling the front from the back on this pattern. This pattern has them attached at the crotch, so there's no crotch seam on this. It did not state on the pattern anywhere what was the front of the pattern and the back of the pattern. It doesn't say front waistline or center back, nothing. So when you look at this piece, I'm going to just pull it up a little bit so you can see. You can see this leg shape is quite different. Now, it's easy on this one to tell because I've already appliqued on the back. This is my back because I put an applique. But if I didn't have that applique here and you were looking at this leg line, this is the front of the leg. This is where the hip, where our leg goes into our hip joint, and when you sit down, the leg comes forward. So you can see how cropped close this is, and this is the rear end because this is where it needs to cup around. So if you look at this leg pattern on anything, it could be a swimsuit bottom, it could be a pair of underwear. There are quite a few patterns that may have the crotch line attached like this, and they may not mark front from back. Look for this leg shape. It'll always be fuller in the back, and it'll be cut tight. It'll be short in the front to allow for our hip. So now that I've told you about that, the first thing I've done is I've just finished off my side seam allowances, and now we're actually going to install the elastic. Now this pattern calls for putting in bias tape and using the bias tape as a channel to put the elastic in, which is fine. I am going to use my serger to do the elastic, which is the same method I use on swimwear and underwear. It's less bulky and softer, and I would rather, if I have the option, to do something that is less bulky and softer for the baby. So I'm going to go to my serger and show you how I set that up for doing elastic. Alright, so this is the wrong side of my fabric. I have my 1/4 inch elastic, and I have set it up so that the elastic and the fabric are just caught. I'm not sewing any fabric off on this. So my elastic is going to get stitched right along this edge. Now, when I first start stitching, and I'm going to go ahead and do that, I want to sew just long enough to get my elastic caught by the needles. And now that I've done that, I'm going to stretch my elastic, but not my fabric. And what that does is when I let go, that makes the elastic gather up. And I'm going to stretch it quite a bit because this is going to get stitched twice. It's going to stitch the first time with the serging, and then when I fold it over and stitch it at the sewing machine to finish the edge, it'll have a second layer of stitching. So I want to make sure I give it plenty of give. If I don't stretch it enough, it'll make for a loose leg, and if I stretch it too much, it can be too tight of a leg. So I have to kind of do it in between. And this is for me, so this is stretching it all the way. That's too tight. This is not stretching it at all, so I'm kind of stretching in between those two, fairly tight but not all the way. You have to make sure your elastic is caught by the feed dogs or by the needles first, or you'll just pull the elastic right back out. And I think I'm going to do an underwear or swimwear. I think I'll do underwear first because it's easier than a whole swimsuit. But I think I will do that just because there's some great elastic techniques in that. And I can tell my serger is not happy. It's making some loops, so I'm going to have to go back and check it. Alright. So, and because I did it that way, and I didn't use, oh my goodness, look at the loops. But there, you can see how nice and stretchy that leg is. So if I fold this over, see how that pulls up? There's the two differences. So pretty nice. There's the elastic on this one. Here's the one without the elastic. Okay, I'm going to check my serger and see why it's making, I'm going to just show you. See those loops? Yeah, that's not, it shouldn't be doing that. So there's something unhappy in the setting, so I'm going to check that. And then I will do the other leg. And I'm going to go ahead and trim off this excess. Now, and I'm ready to go. Okay, something I didn't say when I did this the first time is that I actually leave a tail of elastic longer when I start, that's longer than my fabric, and I sink that in the needles, and then so I have this little excess that I'm going to have to cut off. And then you make sure you don't get the elastic near the knife. You have to make sure your elastic doesn't get clipped or it's going to ruin the elastic. So you have to be careful about those two things. So my needles are caught, my elastic is near, I'm going to readjust my fabric, there we go. And when I did this, I did front to back on the first side. This side I'm doing back to front. I've adjusted my cutting width, hoping that fixes the problem with the thread. And it did. All right, so now it's not super beautiful, but that's how it looks. See how stretchy that is? I do have a few little bubbles in there, but not bad. So now this is going to get folded up and stitched again, but I'm ready for side seams. All right, I'm going to do side seams next. I've just, I'm starting at the elastic. I've got the elastic sunk, it's on the 5/8 inch, and I've just pinned the rest of my little side seam. And I should have mentioned, and I forgot to, that when I serged this, but if you don't serge it, you could do this same trick with the zigzag at your sewing machine. Just do a regular zigzag to attach it, and then there's a special zigzag we'll use to finish it with, which I'll show you in a minute. But right now I'm just going to sew up 2 little side seams on these little bloomers. There's one little leg. All right, side seams are done, and now I'm just going to finish off the waistband, and this time with my serger. So I'm just going to put it under. It's a circle now, and I'm just going to go around the circle real quick, and make sure your seams are pushed open like this when you go across them. So here's my seam. I have it pressed open or pushed open. I haven't pressed it yet. And if you press it first, it does go better. Woo, the vibration of the serger made the camera not happy. So I'm completely done with the serging, and I actually have what looks like a pair of little bloomers now. Not finished, but close. And so I'm going to do the same thing I did on the little dress, which is make the casing for the elastic. Now, the last time I did the casing, it was for the neckline. This time it's for the waistline. The waistline is going to use a wider elastic, so I have to give myself a little more room when I do this. And I'm going to check my pattern real quick. Well, I checked the pattern, and they're only using 3/8 inch elastic in the waistline, which is pretty narrow. I probably would have gone with 1/2 inch. But the seam allowance is not allowed for that much. So we're going to turn down our it's about 3/4 of an inch is what I'm doing here, but you could do 5/8 if you're doing the pattern exactly the way it says. And so I'm going to turn that down all the way around, pin it, and we're going to straight stitch this next, leaving a little hole for the elastic to go through. Okay, so I did turn it down 3/4 instead of the 5/8 so that I can put a little bit wider elastic in here. And I'm stitching on the 5/8 inch line. I'm starting at a side seam because I have a cute embroidery in the back and I don't want my crossover line in the front, so I'm going to have my little hole opening on the side seam. Alright, I'm back around. Here's where I started. Here's my threads. So I'm just going to take a couple more stitches close. Set my needle. And there we go. Now I have this little hole right here to feed my elastic through for the waist, and I'm going to next finish off my legs, these little legs. So I'm going to change the seam and currently have it set for a straight stitch at 3. I'm going to go to a triple zigzag, and I'm going to show you what that looks like on my machine. This is how it looks, and I don't know how easy you can tell, but it has multiple stitches in each leg of the zigzag. So instead of just having a stitch here and a stitch here, it actually says stitch, 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 stitch. It's a very tight, secure stitch. It looks very pretty from the outside. When you have to have a zigzag show, this is a good one. This is the stitch I use for all of my leg elastic on underwear, swimwear, little bloomers, things like that. So this is my favorite one. I am going to stitch it out on a scrap real quick just to see how tight it is. Sometimes I like to open it up a little bit and not have it so close together. So I'm going to grab a scrap and test it out. I'm now pinning my leg elastic down, and I'm on the right side of my garment, so I'm folding under, making sure the seam allowance is open. I'm starting at the only seam on this, which is at the outside seam, and pinning it. It's kind of stiff. There's elastic in there as well as 2 layers of fabric, and when you pin, you have to stretch a little. So I'm going to actually turn the light off on this for a minute. Maybe that'll make it easier to see. There we go. Okay. So see how I stretch? Grab a pin. So I stretch it and then stick the pin in. So I'm doing that all the way around the circle. This one's already done. Look at that teeny tiny little leg opening. And I'm going to now stitch it. And I like to do, because this is the crotch underneath, a lot of times it'd be a seam, this one doesn't. That's where I'm actually going to start stitching. This is sewn in a circle, so I don't have to worry about my starts and stops. I'm going to start and stop in the same place underneath in the crotch where it's going to be seam the least. So that's where I'm going to start. Turn my machine back on. And I'm using my free arm, and it does, some baby clothes are small enough they will not fit over the free arm, just letting you know. So, but the nice thing about the free arm, I've got it stretched over it. Let me bring you around to the front real quick. I've got it stretched over. See how it actually stretches my elastic out for me, which makes it nice when I'm ready to sew. So that's what I'm going to do. Let me get my threads under the foot. Always start with your threads underneath. This one's the bobbin, get it out of the way. Now I've got markings on my machine. You can see all these little markings. So I'm trying to sew at about 3/8, which puts my edge of my fabric in the center of this toe, kind of. And so I'm going to just go ahead and start my stitch. Can you see how many little stitches it makes in each leg of the zigzag? Now, because I have this on here, it's actually stretching for me. So I'm just going to make sure it's feeding, and it is. Pull out my pin. And the place that it's going to struggle the most is when I get to the seam, because it's very bulky and there's multiple layers, and I just want to make sure that the seam doesn't fold back. And I'm going to keep going around my circle. All right, so I'm now at the seam, and I just want to make sure, I'm going to show you on this side, that when you're going through that the feed dogs don't hit the seam and fold it back like this and stitch it down. So before I went through, I just made sure that everything was underneath correctly. So whenever you stop to check anything, sink your needle, just how I had it, sink your needle, so that when you raise your presser foot, your fabric's stationary. You don't move it around, because you can end up moving your stitch and it will look ugly. So everything's good. I'm going to go ahead and stitch. And this is where I said it was going to be kind of stiff. Now you don't want to pull on this too much, because you're actually going to change your stitch. Let me move that out of the way. But it's nice and heavy right here. But the machine's going right through it. Okay, I'm going to stop and readjust my fabric. All right, all that's left is threading the elastic through the waist of the pants. So here's my elastic. It's about a 1/2 inch. I have white elastic. It won't show either way because it's going inside of the casing. If it were going to show, I would use black like I did on this, but even the elastic on the leg, if you see, can't be seen anymore because it's wrapped inside the fabric. So and because the fabric doesn't shadow through, it's not as big a deal. So I'm going to find my hole, which I know I did on the side seam, and the safety pin just helps me push it through. I have not cut this elastic. This pattern I've found, they have you cut the elastic pretty long, and I don't want a tight waist for a baby around the tummy, but I do want the pants to stay up. So I'm going to feed this through and then decide my length instead of going with the pattern. On the neckline, I ended up cutting off over 5 inches of elastic. Whenever you're feeding the elastic through, you want to make sure it doesn't twist. So you just want to keep it nice and flat and straight. And I'm pushing through, and the pin really helps. And the only thing is, right at the seam, you have to watch that you don't get caught behind a seam like this when you're fishing. We go fishing with our elastic, so I'm just pushing, and then I pull, and it helps pull the elastic in. Here's my tail in the hole, and we're going to go all the way around. This is an easy one because it's a tiny little circle. The pattern called for, I believe, 3/8 inch elastic throughout for the waist and the legs. I chose to do 1/4 inch elastic on the legs and 1/2 inch elastic on the waist. A wider elastic on the waist, even for a baby, is better. It will roll less, and that's always more comfortable, even if there's a diaper inside. So here I am all the way around, and I just want to make sure I don't have it twisted where it came out, because this is soft, and I don't. Okay, so now I'm going to check my size of my waist, and I know I want it smaller than this. Pull. I'm going to disperse my elastic a little bit. All right. It's wanting to fold on me, and I just want to make sure it doesn't. And I can actually feel a twist right there, so I'm going to straighten that twist out. Oop. Caught it on my threads. There we go, nice and straight now. So here's this tail, and now I'm going to pull on this piece just to tighten it up more, to get my waist closer to how it should be, a little bit more. I'm just going to shift some of the gathers down, and now I'm ready to stitch these two to each other and cut off my tails. All right, I've cut off the excess elastic, so these are my tails overlapping. There's about an inch overlap, and I have a pin across it to hold it in place. I've got my machine set for just a regular zigzag, and hopefully it does it, because I can see it's got stuck in its memory the old zigzag. So I'm going to go to the straight stitch and back. Oh yeah, it's still going to do the regular zigzag. Okay, so we're good. Whenever you do elastic, I'm going to sink my needle, take the pin out. Let me switch hands. There we go. All right. Sorry, I'm holding the camera and don't have it on its tripod so you can see close up. Okay, so we're going to now just zigzag our ends. I've already got it started. I've got about a 1-inch overlap, and whenever you do this, you just want to zigzag close to your tail end, and I've got a funky little stitch going here because I had a memory thing on here and I didn't turn it off before I started, but it won't matter because it is going to be hidden and it is a zigzag and we just want it nice and secure. So you go back and forth a couple times, make sure that you go all the way down. I always back stitch all the way back. I try to get at least 3 to 4 stitches in. So I've done this side of the tail and now I'm going to just, oh, there we go. Okay. So now that the elastic is stitched, I just pull on it and it goes inside the waistband. So look, it looks like regular little bloomers already, but I have a hole here. This is the hole where I stitched, left it open to put the elastic in. So I'm going to pull my gathers to each side and I'm going to straight stitch that shut and then trim my threads and I'm done. There we go. And I started in my old stitches, which is the same as a back stitch, or you can back stitch there and stitch across to my old stitches, and I will go ahead and back stitch. And it's done. Now all that's left is to trim up my threads.